Welcome, good evening. Isn't it a glorious summer day? The first one we've had in all summer, right? It's good to have you here. Yes, it's really wonderful to have you here at Dominican University of California. I know I've seen many people who are guests of our lecture series, and faculty and staff who are here tonight. And I wanted to thank you for joining us, and our very special students who have volunteered their time tonight, as well as our staff, to be greeting you. So could we thank them for their evening support? Thank you. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the lecture series, this is our 8th year. This is the 8th fall that we've been in partnership with bringing amazing people to Marin and being supported by Book Passage. Can we thank them for their help? My name is Denise Lucy, and I'm a professor of business and leadership and the director of our Institute for Leadership Studies, which is a host for tonight's event. And these events happen because we are interested in engaging with our community around ideas around how we affect change and how individuals affect change. And we have these great people from all the disciplines. Tonight, of course, the amazing Rosanne Cash, who's going to be wonderful this evening to greet us. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the other speakers we've had. Some of you who've been here before know that we've had Vice President Gore here last semester, Isabel Allende, Susie Orman, Nancy Pelosi, Bill Bradley, Paul Hawken, Daniel Goldman, all these really remarkable leaders in the field. And it is important for our students to have access to these people, and we're thrilled that our community can join them. I want to thank, again, Elaine and Bill Petrocelli for their just marvelous support and the great community organization that they've developed over the last 30 years here in Marin and also in San Francisco. Also, we want to thank Viking Publishing and Lizzie Prevet for bringing Rosanne to us as well. So in partnership with Book Passage and Viking Books, we have this opportunity. Marin Magazine has been a sponsor of ours now for 3 years, and we are very much thankful to them for always helping us to get the word out to the community. So it is my pleasure to introduce the founder and owner of Book Passage, Elaine Petrocelli, who will introduce our guest. Elaine?
Well, when we got a call from Viking Publishing at Book Passage saying that our dream had come true and Rosanne Cash was going to come to an event for us, the entire store was excited. I have a secret to tell you. A lot of us work late at Book Passage because we have so many night events, and some of us drive a long way home. And we have to be careful that we stay awake. But we also need to calm down because when we get home, we're going to want to go to sleep. And we just found out quite a few of us, including me, have decided that the best thing is to listen to Rosanne Cash singing as you go home. You stay awake because the words are so amazing and the poetry is so beautiful, but the music gets all the tension out of you. So I highly recommend it. The music you've been hearing tonight is from Rosanne's latest CD, The List, which are songs from a list her father gave her of great songs. So that CD is for sale, and you know me at Book Passage, I am all about your spending money. So I know you want that, as well as several copies of this gorgeous book by Rosanne Cash composed. Rosanne Cash's prose rivals her poetry. It is beautiful and lyrical. She opens her heart to us and tells us about growing up in her most talented, most unusual, sometimes very difficult family. She tells us about her beginnings of her career. She speaks to us of love, of loss, of beauty, of friendship. And when you finish, you feel, I really love and know this woman. And so I am so proud to be able to introduce you all to Rosanne Cash.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you to Book Passage and the Dominican University for having me out here on this gorgeous day. I live in New York City, and this is really spectacular weather. A lot of people were asking me, why did you choose to write a book now? And I said, I didn't choose to write it now, I chose to finish it now. Because I've been working on this book for 10 years. About 12 years ago, I lost my voice. I got vocal polyps, and I couldn't sing for 2.5 years. And it was a real crushing blow to my self-esteem because I'd always considered myself a writer first, and it was shocking to discover how central my voice was to my self-image and to my well-being, actually. But the good thing that came out of it was that I started this cottage industry of writing essays for different publications. I wrote for the New York Times and New York Magazine and Rolling Stone and even Martha Stewart Living and the Oxford American. And I wrote this essay called The Ties That Bind, about family and music, and family in music as subject matter, contextually and content. And it was chosen for this compilation edited by Peter Guralnick, who's a very wonderful music writer, called Best Music Writing 2000. So my editor at Viking read this piece and he called me up, he said, that is the beginning of a memoir. And I said, I'm too young to write a memoir. And he said, think about several volumes. And then he sent me the work of MFK Fisher, one of your very own here in the Bay Area. And actually, she did move up here, right? Because she was Southern California, and then she moved up, right? She quickly became one of my favorite writers, and she wrote about her life in the most beautifully peripheral way. She wrote about food, and yet she was writing about her life. She would be having a meal and describing the meal, and yet there was a man there. And there were feelings. She was on a plane, and she would describe the meal on the plane, but she was going somewhere to see someone. And it was so interwoven, because she was a food writer and a cook, you know, this was a central part of her life. It was so interwoven so beautifully, I thought I could write about my life by writing about songs, because they are at the center of my life. So that was really the guiding principle while I was writing this book. I wrote more essays, and then I would think, well, that belongs in the book, and I would pull it out and rework it. And then at the end, I wrote a narrative to kind of connect these. It's not a chronological book. It's not a linear book. It's not a fact check of my life, as I say, because that's not really how I experience life in a linear way. Themes connect people and events rather than dates and time, and that became more apparent the more I wrote. I think the best way to describe that to you is to read you the introduction. For my entire life, I have been trying to give voice to the rhythms and words that underscore, propel, and inform me. Because my peripheral vision is more acute than my direct powers of observation, and my love of an A minor chord is more charged and refined than my understanding of my own psyche, I have often attempted to explain my experiences to myself through songs, by writing them, singing them, listening to them, deconstructing them, and letting them fill me like food and water. I've charted my life through not only the songs I've composed, but the songs I've discovered, the songs that have been given to me, the songs that are part of my legacy and ancestry. Through them, I've often found meaning and relief, while other times I've failed to recognize or understand a rhythm or a theme until it became urgent or ingrained, and I finally came across a song that captured the experience. My life has been circumscribed by music. I have learned more from songs than I ever did from any teacher in school. They are interwoven and have flowed through the most important relationships in my life with my parents, my husband, and my children. Songs have unfolded in my living room and under the spotlight, For me, music has always involved journeys, both literal and metaphoric. Sometimes I took the journey first and found the song waiting at the destination. Some songs have led me to true love. Occasionally, a song has been only a faint whisper at the periphery of a larger event, though it was always present. Many of my own songs have taken the long way around, as I circled the edges of an experience, examining the placement of the furniture or the color of the room, the backbeat and the verses, the chord progression and the melody, constantly roaming and constantly curious. I dream of songs. I dream they fall down through the centuries from my distant ancestors and come to me. I dream of lullabies and sea shanties and keening cries and rhythms and stories and backbeats. I dream of the summer of love and the British invasion and the cries of Appalachia and the sound and soul of the Mississippi Delta. I've resisted so many times correcting public misperceptions about me and my life, out of pride, out of pain, or out of a longing for privacy. But I relish the opportunity to write about my life in this book, not to set any records straight, but to extend the poetry and to find the more subtle melodies and themes in a life that on reflection seems much longer than the years I have lived. Documenting one's life in the midst of living it is a strange pursuit. I've always wanted to live as a beginner, and writing a memoir in some ways defies that notion. But I consider this book as a first installment in an ongoing story. I don't know why some memories have persisted while others have faded, but I trust tenacity. So those are the memories I've written about. This is not a chronological fact check of my life, and I'm sure my sisters or my husband or my children remember some of these events very differently. I have abandoned my reliance on the external facts to support an individual truth, and everyone is entitled to his or her own. This is mine. So far, so good. More to come. More is always to come. I wanted to be a writer from about the age of 9. And then when I was 18 years old, I went on the road with my dad for an extended period, 2.5 years. And it was that summer that he gave me a list of songs. I grew up in Southern California, and I was steeped in the music of the 60s, the Beatles, and everything else. And the Summer of Love, which was hugely important to me. Then I didn't really care about country music or even American roots music that much. But I went on the road with my dad, and he mentioned a song. And I said, I don't know that one. He mentioned another. I said, I don't know that one either. And he became very alarmed. He spent the rest of the day making a list for me. And at the end of the day, he wrote on the top 100 essential country songs. And he said, this is your education. And I took that very seriously. It was an education. These songs, not only was my dad giving me a piece of his heart and soul, but he was giving me a piece of my own heart and soul, which I didn't realize until later. It was as if he were a martial arts master passing on a secret, or he was giving me the code to our DNA. Songs were currency in my family. So when I got this list of songs, I decided I want to be a songwriter. This is a noble profession. I could do this. I learned all of these songs, and I began writing very bad songs, which he said were wonderful, just like any good parent, and encouraged me. And I wanted to be the writer who was in a dark room somewhere alone, setting depth charges of great feeling out in the world with just my melody and my words. I had no interest in becoming a performer. I didn't need that much attention. And I had a very great performer in my family casting a very long shadow. And I thought, why would I do this? Also, my mother's anxiety about the life of a traveling musician made a deep imprint on me. She thought, you know, from what she could observe, you got addicted to drugs, your marriage broke apart, and you were always traveling. Why would you want to do this? But I grew into being a performer. I developed the ambition for it maybe 10 years after I had been doing it. And it was partly because I didn't want that peripatetic of a life, and partly because I was self-conscious about my voice. I was around a lot of great singers, and I thought, well, this is not who I am. I want to read you a little bit about the quandaries with the voice and about one particular great singer who made a great impact. One day in 1988, I was lying on my couch in a sleepy reverie as the afternoon sun spilled through the huge bay window in the living room of my log house outside Nashville, when it occurred to me in a sharp, unsettling way that I was a singer. Not only was I a singer, but I sang for a living, which meant that a lot of people who were strangers to me were familiar with my voice without knowing me personally. They might not even know my name, but they had heard and now could recognize the voice, a product of my genes and experience, authentic, but extremely personal in my estimation. This was largely how I felt about my voice, that it was undependable, beyond my control, somewhat embarrassing at times, if not too low, then too high, if not too soft, then too loud, or too harsh, or too wimpy. It was simply not enough, not right, and as such it exposed me far, far more than I could comfortably allow. It presented the perfect conundrum, and therefore an irresistible career choice. My ambivalent relationship with my voice certainly had something to do with the fact that thanks to my father's profession, our family was exposed to great singers who were also extraordinary personalities from an early age. My mother, for her part, was a devoted Patsy Cline fan and would say her name with slightly pursed lips, Patsy. No last name needed, vowels squeezed a little by disapproval, but the tight mouth holding back a barely contained thrill. Patsy was wicked and fabulous when both qualities really meant something, before they became cheap ideas used to market more marginal talents. She was the object of fascination, distrust, and raw, if hidden, admiration, but not judgment. There was nothing to attach judgment to because Patsy did not judge herself. She was too truly and spontaneously alive, too rooted in her body, too in command of a startling sexuality that infused everything, and that was the vehicle for a preternaturally affecting voice that both revealed and obscured her essence. People who have genuine memories of her have become somewhat revisionist in their collective retelling. She was so great, also in the pre-marketing sense of the word, that they have felt almost obliged to polish and repair her wild and willful personality to suit the magnitude of her talent, particularly since she was a woman in an era that did not suffer female unaccountability gladly. I once asked Mom what she remembered about Patsy. Not as someone who would have a professional take, for that I would have called my dad, but as a woman who had been so deeply affected by her. She laughed but didn't ask why I had posed the question. I didn't know her well, she admitted, but your daddy and I did have her over to the house not long before she died. She had a mouth like a sailor, and she didn't put on airs. She was just Patsy, comfortable in her skin. I admired that, but that beautiful voice and body were so different from her roughness. Mom paused. I love her singing, she said passionately, present tense. And after considering the matter a while, added, well, she was very friendly. I laughed, my revisionist theory confirmed. Were you disillusioned when you met her, Mom? Well, I wouldn't want that to be said. She was ahead of her time, that's all. There was a quiet pause and then a little sigh. I never got pictures with her. Patsy Cline's gifts were extraordinary enough to have become a profound source of inspiration, even to those of us without immediate memories of her, those of us whose voices weren't so full-bodied and fully formed from the beginning, and whose values were not so exquisitely self-determined. In my private quandaries about my own voice, it gave me a lot of satisfaction to connect her teeming personality to the gifts she possessed. She lived a life utterly her own, messy and self-defined, and it all fed and merged with that voice. At the end of our conversation, I couldn't help asking, "Mom, was I at that party?" "Sure, honey, that was in, 1963. All you kids were born then." I sighed wistfully. Somewhere in the blackout of early childhood, I had had an encounter with Patsy Cline. I may spend the rest of my life trying to remember it. So I did become a singer. And another part of that, I say I may have spent too much time around Emmy Lou, who provided a template of voice that I could never hope to reach. It was so different from mine. I finally realized it was just really different. It wasn't good, bad, and stopped reaching for that. But I became a songwriter, and like I said, that was the center of my self-image, and that was where I found the most honor. But losing my voice and then when I had lost my voice, I said to myself, if I ever get it back, I'm not going to run those tapes anymore. I'm not going to beat myself up inside and run the self-criticism every time I'm on stage. I'm going to enjoy it. And I kept that promise to myself. My voice was trashed at the end of that 2 years, and I had to spend a year rebuilding it. And then when I did get it back, I welcomed it as an old friend, and I didn't criticize it anymore. It was a great lesson for me, actually. But at some point before that, I had seeded my own future with the idea of being a songwriter, I think. And time is very mutable in my book. I quote Thornton Wilder at one point. He says that time is a vast landscape, and it is only the eye of the beholder that moves. And I felt that very much writing this book. There were so many things that were immediately connected in past, present, and future that it was thrilling, and it seemed so natural. It seemed much more natural than writing a straight linear chronology. But here's something that happened that was a bit of time travel. I hate to do this at Dominican University, but are there any really devout Catholics here? Uh-oh. Okay, well, if there are, no offense intended. Let me just plant that out there before I start. I respect you deeply. My mother was devout Catholic too. I just had to go another way. The word contrition comes from the Latin word for bruise or grind, a derivation that makes perfect sense to me as a former Catholic. Something in the drone and the rhythm of the act of contrition through my faults, through my most grievous fault, which I said to a man behind a screen in a dark confessional booth for so many years, was uniquely compelling. It took me many years to realize it wasn't my fault, or even my grievous fault, however much I was drawn in by the swing of the words and the safe intimacy of confession. What all those anxiously droned acts of contrition chiefly accomplished was to break me down, bruising my sense of self permanently, or so I thought. In any case, they had the immediate effect of making me withdraw from the truth about myself for a very long time. The truth about me, as it turned out, was unacceptable, not only to Catholicism, but to adults in general. The truth about me was not meant to fit into the system of convent school, religion, contrition, or punition. None of that mattered. I was a writer. It would save me. One day in 1990, after I had finished my album Interiors and was beginning to write the songs for The Wheel, I went to my file cabinet and aimlessly pulled out a folder of papers my mother had recently sent me of my artwork, homework, and spelling lists from the 7th grade. Leafing through them, I came upon an English project I had done on metaphors and similes. Reading the piece, I vividly remembered the excitement I had felt on being given this particular assignment, for it was the very first time in my entire career as a student that I had been excited about anything the nuns had ever asked me to do. I read through my discussion of metaphors and similes, and I could feel the thrill of my 12-year-old self coming off the page, a nascent writer in love with language, as if language were a potential lover. I came to a single page that said, in big letters I had printed very, very carefully, "A lonely road is a bodyguard." It was a metaphor I had invented, and I was pleased with myself for having chosen this powerful image over the more straightforward simile, "A lonely road is like a bodyguard." I lifted that sentence from my 7th grade project and put it directly into a song I was writing, Sleeping in Paris. There goes. I'll send the angels to watch over you tonight, and you send them right back to me. A lonely road is a bodyguard if we really want it to be. That song ended up on the wheel, and whenever I hear it now, or think of it, or sing it, I nod to my little girl self, and she, in the wisdom of her great distance and perspective, looks on with pleasure and the patience of one who has waited a long time to be noticed. This one line in this one song is how I know who I am and how I know I survived. Thank you. I did survive. There were some difficult times. I lost a lot of people in my family in a short period, and then I had brain surgery, which I wrote about in the book. This interviewer said, how could you write those details about brain surgery? Couldn't you soft pedal it? And I said, I did. But you get a good hard look at your own mortality. It is very motivating. And the year after the brain surgery, I spent a lot of time thinking, what do I want to do in this world that I haven't done? What is most urgent to me? And this was number one, finishing this book. And number two was making the record The List, which was a record I made last year based on that list that my dad gave me when I was 18 years old. That was the first step into really claiming the legacy that my father showed me those many years ago. And this is the second step because it's about, I don't think I could have written this about my own life had I kept pushing away what my parents had been trying to give me. And I probably pushed it away longer than was gracious. I'm a middle-aged woman. It's appropriate when you're young, but not so appropriate when you're middle-aged. But fortunately, my father understood that better than anyone, that I had to find my own way. I don't know what else to tell you about this book, except that it's a little strange. And I want to read one more part to you before we go to question and answer, and I'm happy to answer just about anything. But in 1997, I was invited to give the commencement address at Memphis College of Art, 1998. And they gave me an honorary doctorate, so you can call me doctor if you want to. Which was a surprise, and it was lovely. But I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to say to these kids who were graduating that day, who were artists, and who many of them would go on to have jobs in commercial art ventures and not be able to indulge, at least as much as they might want, their own artistic impulses. They would be working for someone else. And I wanted to talk to them about keeping that impulse alive, even if they had to do other things, that the impulse to art has been my redemption. And this is what I said to them in part. We all need art and music like we need blood and oxygen. The more exploitative, numbing, and assaulting popular culture becomes, the more we need the truth of a beautifully phrased song, dredged from a real person's depth of experience, delivered in an honest voice. The more we need the simplicity of paint on canvas, or the arc of a lonely body in the air, or the photographer's unflinching eye. Art, in the larger sense, is the lifeline to which I cling in a confusing, unfair, sometimes dehumanizing world. In my childhood, the nuns and priests insisted, sometimes in a shrill and punitive tone, that religion was where God resided and where I might find transcendence. I was afraid they were correct for so many years, and that I was the one at fault for not being able to navigate the circuitry of dogma and ritual. For me, it turned out to be a decoy, a mirage framed in sound and fury. Art and music have proven to be more expansive, more forgiving, and more immediately alive. For me, art is a more trustworthy expression of God than religion. So I thank you very much for coming, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Taking the long way around.
I'm taking the long way around, but while I do, I'd like to remind you that Rosanne Cash has graciously allowed us to record this evening's event for radio at dominican.edu. So if you want to hear it again or tell any of your friends who were not smart enough to come tonight, they can hear it too. The first question I'd like to ask you is kind of a deep one. This person says, I caught a snippet of a radio interview with you, and you were commenting on forgiveness, letting go of resentments, that sort of thing. Could you elaborate about that, how you did this, and what sort of techniques you used? And is it an ongoing process, or...
Well, I'm not a spiritual teacher, so I can only say what happened to me. You know, I lost a baby in '95, and it disabused me of my notion that I was special, which was a great thing to happen to me. I thought I was exempt from that kind of pain. And I started realizing that everybody had a tragedy, and if they didn't, they would. And that people carried great loss and sorrow in their hearts, and yet they would still open the door for you and let you go in the elevator first and give your child a lollipop. And my heart really grew from that. I developed a lot of compassion, and I saw that there was a fork in my life. I could choose to become bitter, or I could choose to let myself open up, even as painful as it was. And I kind of had this vision of my future, how I would look if I chose to become bitter, and how I would look the other way. And I was much more aligned in the bitter way. So part of the decision was pure vanity. I'm going to work at not being bitter. Forgiveness, I don't know. I think it's overrated sometimes, to tell you the truth. You know, you forgive when you're ready. You can't make yourself forgive. It's like maybe you need to be angry for a while. I certainly have. But I don't feel angry or bitter now. And that's the other thing I wanted to say about the book, actually, is that it's not a celebrity tell-all, and I don't blame or, you know, throw dirt on anyone, because I wanted to keep my integrity and be able to look myself in the mirror in the morning.
None of us are ever going to have any lines then. This person wants to know who taught you to play the guitar, and did it come easy and naturally to you?
That summer that I went on the road with my dad when I was 18, Carl Perkins and the Carter family were also on the road with him. And so there was a lot of time in the dressing room, and I learned guitar from Carl Perkins and the Carter family. And the person who socked in the most time with me was Helen Carter, June's sister and Mother Maybell's daughter. And she taught me virtually the entire Carter family lexicon in a way to say, this is yours, keep it alive. It was a beautiful, beautiful gift. So the first thing I learned on guitar was that Carter scratch. It's a very particular way of doing rhythm and lead at the same time. And that's still kind of how I play. And no, it's not easy.
Another question. This is like asking you which of your children is your favorite. This
Which
person's
song?
favorite album is the King's Record Store and wants to know
Record
what
shop.
your favorite is. Shop, you're right.
Of my own records?
Yeah.
I don't think of them that way. Like if I hear one of my records on the radio, I think, oh, I was 7 months pregnant when I did that vocal. Or, oh, I was living there. Oh, that's right after I met John and fell in love with him. So they're all connected to my life. And also, I don't think that my interpretation of my records are the definitive interpretation. Once I make it, it's yours, it's somebody else's, and those interpretations are more valid than mine. Having said that, I think my favorite record is the next one I'm going to do.
Mine's the one I have for sale. And speaking of that, this person wants to know what book you're reading, and or is there a book that you've really loved that you'd like to tell us about?
I finished this summer reading Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Oh, did somebody start to clap? It was so good. And it won a big prize. I can't remember which prize. And just finished today Bill Flanagan's book, Evening's Empire, which is about a fictional rock band called the Ramones, and it goes from the 60s up to the present, and it's told from the manager's point of view. And there was so much music biz detail in it that was so funny and great. I loved that. And what else am I reading? The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Just started that.
That's quite a book.
Yeah.
Both great books. We should get you behind our counter. Several people have asked this question in one way or another, which is, you know, in order to write this beautiful memoir, you really had to tell some things that seem pretty private. Mm-hmm. How do you keep your private life when you're, it's not a tell-all, but you're pretty hard on yourself? Because
I still have a really clear line in my mind and in my life about what is private and what is public. It's, you know, I didn't tell you where my kids go to school or particular things about them or the fights I got in with my husband or any of that. You know, that's, if I could bring poetry to it, then it seemed like it was fair game. Many things I didn't write about because there are people still living I didn't want to hurt. And I think that's a very fair thing to do. It's not cheating the memoir, it's not lying or withholding, it's just, it's a kind thing to do, I think. And my sense of privacy is still really strong. But the other thing I want to say is that a lot of my experiences have been very unusual, the external experiences, but the internal experiences are not unusual. There's nothing here that only I experienced. So that felt to me like there was no risk, because everybody struggles to understand what they do well in this world, suffers loss, you know, has a crush on somebody, the things about being a parent, a wife, those are universal. So I didn't feel a risk in that.
This is a very important question about the book. This person wants to know if that photo is on the High Line.
Good question. It looks like the High Line, but it's not. It's the roof of the EMI building in New York City. But it does look like the High Line.
And while we're on the photo, here's another question. My wife wants to know where you got the boots on the cover of your book. And Do you still want them? What size are they?
I wear those boots all the time. I wore them today on the airplane. I wear them everywhere. They're my favorite boots, my lucky boots. And they look like they're Western or cowboy, but they're actually a fancy French designer. Hate to say that. They're Chloe. I know. My husband just rolls his eyes at me.
Oh, they're great. You mentioned in your book that you are more of a national traveler. What's the first place that comes to mind as the most impressionable or most dazzling place?
Well, Paris. It's such a romantic city. Yay. I love Paris. I'm a bit of a Francophile. What's not to love about Paris, you know? It's so beautiful, and the food. I mean, what's not to love is that they can be very rude, but it's a great story I wrote about in the book about walking in Paris and hearing Guy Clark, who come out of a record store, great musician in case you don't know him, great songwriter. And I perked up and I walked into this record store and it was all American roots music. And I see a bin with my own name on it. So I go over and I'm flipping through the records and I lift up my record Rhythm and Romance. And the owner comes over to me and he said, no, that is not a good record. And then he pulled out King's Record Shop and he said, this is a good record. And I was so shy, but I said, it's me. And he didn't get it. And so I held up the record next to my face. I said, c'est moi. And he said, oh my God. And then we went off and drank a bottle of red wine together.
That's wonderful. Is your writing process different when you're writing prose than when you're writing your songs?
Yeah, I write earlier when I'm writing prose. I write at 7, 8, 9 in the morning. I don't write songs that early. I don't know why that is. I should ask a neuroscientist. And also, I can write songs kind of on the fly in the car or when I'm doing other stuff. I jot ideas and lines down. Can't do that with prose.
Several people have asked you to sing, so I'm skipping those. But someone wants to know if you keep in touch with the Carter children and how they're doing.
My brother, John Carter, I'm in fairly regular touch with. Rosie died, my stepsister. And Carlene I don't see much of. I think she's out here, actually. And
a couple of people have asked if you're going to do more of the list.
Yes. Not next. I don't want to do it as my next record, but at some point, yes, I'm going to do volume 2. In fact, there's a couple of things that didn't make this volume, so we've already kind of started it.
And this person is from Tennessee and wants to know, do you consider yourself a Tennessean, a Californian, a New Yorker?
A New Yorker. I mean, you know that saying, we always thought she was kind of weird, turns out she's just a New Yorker? That's me. That's me. And I feel really at home there. I love the South. I love going to Tennessee and all down south. And I love the women down south particularly. They're so sweet in that way that only Southern women are. And I grew up in California, but I didn't really feel at home until I moved to New York. You know, I love the anonymity. I love being around people who are working at the top of their game.
You know, in your book, there's this absolutely wonderful part about 9/11 when you were at your child's school. Could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll give you the short version of it. My daughter was in a downtown school, and it was the first day of 6th grade, 7th grade. Second day, because this was a Tuesday, and there was a parents' meeting for the first day of school, so I went down with her, and the first plane went over the school, because we were on the west side downtown, and it shook the building, and we were all looking at each other, and this mother said, that plane's going to crash. And then we heard this distant boom, and then I thought, oh, it can't possibly be. And then, of course, it was. And I went around the back of the school and watched the towers burn from the street. And then got my daughter and dragged her 14 blocks north home. But, you know, the day was traumatic enough, but the 3-4 months afterwards, when the smoke was still hanging and the smell was still there, and the ash on our air conditioner, you know, everywhere. It was just horrific. And then sending out forms, will you please fill out this form about the trauma your child's, like how your child is reacting. It's like, nobody should go through this. I'll never forget it.
It's beautifully written, though, in the book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Several people want to know if any of your children are following the family line and becoming musicians.
My daughter Chelsea released her first album last November, and she didn't tell me she was a songwriter until she had nearly finished writing an album. She didn't tell me she was making an album until she was nearly finished making it. The apple didn't fall far from the tree, I have to say, because she really doesn't want me to have anything to do with it. She only asked me one piece of advice. She said, how do I become a successful musician without becoming famous? And it was kind of a heartbreaking question because it was the same question I asked. But she's a tremendously gifted songwriter. She's kind of shocking and very diverse. And if anybody has inherited my dad's sense of rhythm, it's this kid. So far, she's the only one of my daughters that's a musician. My son is only 11, so still too early to tell.
Rosanne, thank you so much for sharing so much with us.
Thank you.